Welcome to the Conjugate Nation podcast.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 4 of the podcast. Moving into this episode, here are the things. You are listening to Jesse Bufano. You can find me at Jesse Bufano on Instagram. You're also listening to...
And I'm Shane Sweat. You can find me on Sweatshop Cincinnati on Instagram, and you can also find me at Conjugate Powerlifting. This is a CrossFit preferred course that I teach.
Chris McDonald at xfactor_Chris.
So over the last 3 episodes, we've talked about the conjugate system as a whole and how we apply it to athletes in sports as well as CrossFitters. If you haven't heard the previous episodes, they are definitely worth a listen leading into this, but also not required. So today, as we move from the conjugate system as a whole into episode 2, where we talked about max effort, and then episode 3, where we talked about dynamic effort, we're now going to move into speaking specifically about accessory work and accessory work for the low body. With that in mind, when you have an athlete who has a movement fault that is not being corrected with cueing, what do? Shane.
You know, you see this, it's really common in a gym that you see this happen. And, we were having a conversation earlier about red shirts and CrossFit being phenomenal at cueing. And then, it's part of their job. They're phenomenal at it. They teach it. But you can't cue everything out of an athlete. And it's extremely common that I go to a gym and a lot of times I'll teach a seminar and I go in on a weekend and they'll have the last class wrapping up before I'm going to start my seminar. And you watch people lifting, and a bunch of people the coaches always want to show you the strongest guy in the gym. And you see a guy in the back corner, and it looks like his knees are caving in. He looks like he's about to die. And you're looking at him, and the coach goes, "Oh, don't mind him. Like, he doesn't listen. I've been telling him to keep his knees out for the last 2 years. He just doesn't listen. But check this guy over here. Like, and they want to show you the strongest person they have in the gym, right? When someone comes in your door, no matter what, as a coach, it's your job to give them the highest quality of life that you can, improve their output and their capabilities. And at some point, when you're cueing somebody, if it is not working, you have to go to the next tool in the job, the tool in the toolbox, I should say. And for me, I usually give someone 1 cue, maybe 2. And the first thing I think about is if they can't do the cue that I give them, are they physically capable of it? Do they have the mobility to attain position, or do they have the strength to maintain position? It is literally that simple. So if I take this individual who their knees cave in, and I have them just like, okay, get out from underneath the bar. Let's do an air squat. If I can cue them through a perfect air squat, now I know the issue is not a mobility issue. It's a strength issue. Okay? Because they demonstrated they have the mobility to attain perfect position. Now I put 135 pounds on their back, their knees cave in, their chest drops. Now I know it's a strength issue. They're not strong enough to maintain position. Okay? So it's very simple at that point for me to decipher whether it's a mobility or strength issue. At that point, then I will put together a protocol to fix the problem. We'll come back, reassess it, and use the same variation of movement that they were failing at as a retest for them. Okay? So it makes it pretty simple in that aspect. And we can use this for literally every movement we do, whether we are running or we need to maintain a position cycling, or we are doing a squat, a press, an Olympic lift, gymnastics. All of this is valid when we're deciphering between the different problems that could cause the fault in movement pattern.
As a nice thing inside of the conjugate system to be able to move through a max effort or dynamic effort day. So accessory work we would do not only on those primary days, but also you could do small workouts on that same day separate from the primary work or on other days. But I've always found that it's nice working with an athlete, especially one-on-one when you get those opportunities, to be working through a primary movement like back squat or deadlift and be watching that pattern, build that up to a max and sort of see where that starts to break down a little bit. And that actually might change your plan for that athlete for that session, even in the moment where like, hey, based off what we looked at here, the next thing we're going to do is move in this direction instead. I thought we were going to spend more time on this, but you can clearly see the breakdown for this athlete in this range of motion or position is this other piece. And now because of that, we're going to prioritize that as our accessory. One thing that I've always used to describe the value of accessory and why we do it is in the ecosystem of training. If you think of it like a big pond full of fish, if those back squats and those deadlifts are the biggest fish in the pond, and that's what we're really hoping to catch, that although that's what we're looking for, it's that whole environment that creates those big fish. Like you need the smaller fish to feed those big fish, and you need the even smaller fish to feed those medium-sized fish. So the accessory work is part of that ecosystem and environment that creates and produces the results that that we're looking for.
So based off of what you're saying, Jesse, this is exactly how I kind of explain accessory movements. One of the things I can do as well is look at performance, not just position. Okay. So every athlete kind of has some different things they'll need to, say, improve a squat. And you might have one athlete where you're going, okay, they drop their chest all the time. They can't keep the high chest position. They have plenty of mobility. So what is an issue? What will raise their squat? So I might find that for this particular athlete, the good mornings are the best thing for them currently to increase their squat. Say I start a good morning protocol, and as they get stronger in good mornings, their squat goes up. They maintain a better chest position. So then what I do from there is say, now what makes a good morning go up? Now I might say face down, side to sides, back extension variations, round arch back off of Anderson good mornings off of pins. And then I might say, well, it's spinal erector variants. And then maybe it's hip movements, hip bridges. So I do hip bridge variations. Now, what causes my side to sides and my back extensions to go up, and what causes my hip bridges to go up? And I take that as far down the rabbit hole as I can until I have nothing left. Because at first, the big compound movement, that good morning, is going to drive that squat, right? But then after that, when you go to the side to sides and the hip bridges and the other variations for hips and for spinal erectors, you're going to get better performance, but you're going to start to fortify position, and you're doing prehab. You're going to make yourself injury resilient by doing these things. Okay. And that is a huge key component. It's exactly what you explained, Jesse.
Yeah. I think for me, what coming into the West conjugate was one of my big things, because if you think about, especially early on when you're doing a lot of the periodized training, if you're just doing back squats and you see a breakdown at a 1 rep max, that same breakdown is probably going to happen at the 3 rep, at the 5 rep, at an 8 rep, if it's really if they're really hitting true maxes. So it's any way you cut it, you're still reinforcing those bad habits, right? So it's like if the hip kicks really hard, high in a back squat, you're just retraining the same thing over and over. You're not making the movement any better. So when I started seeing some of the conjugate style training, especially, I remember very clearly working with Abby Grove, now Abby Dickerson, who ended up going to Westside, and she was on HQ staff. And I would watch her assess athletes after her being at Westside for a year. And it was like, oh my goodness, like you can just, there's just so much more. Cause yeah, I mean, a lot of us, cueing is obviously the first thing the easiest way to fix movement, right? And if you can fix it that way, then yeah, just let it work. But at some point you're going to see some breakdown in that movement from the athlete. And now you have a little bit of a key piece of data where now we can address this. So let's start prescribing some accessory work.
Yeah, and it's can even be like between those patterns, it can be a combination of those two things as well. So it can be a combination of cueing this and then also bringing up those weaknesses or gaps in that athlete's positional performance, or drawing attention to the area where they have a better handle, like by doing a good morning, have a much better handle on maintaining that isometric tension through the midline through a hip hinge pattern. And then because of a better handle of that position, can then apply it to a more complex position. I know one of the things that CrossFit like sometimes can harp on is like, obviously the big compound movements are the bread and butter. Those are the primaries, et cetera. And that is, we are in 100% agreement. Like, the big compound movements are what we want to do and spend our time on. But the other side of that is being able to fortify those positions with simpler patterns can actually assist in that learning process rather than diminish it.
And what you have in this is, if you look, right, what Chris is saying is like, whether it's a 1 rep, a 3 rep, a 5 rep, 8 rep max, the whole point is, what do you want? What is one key component in CrossFit? High intensity. So whether you do that 1 rep, 3 rep, 5 rep, 8, or you're trying to do 100 wall balls for time, if your intensity is there, that's when it's going to break down. Okay. So what we have is you solidify improper motor pattern by doing more reps in an incorrect position than correct position. All right. And then every time we get to high intensity, when we're at our highest chance of injury, like danger, right? Like if you do 100 wall balls for time and you're someone who's getting ultra fatigued and you're getting even sloppier than what you were to begin with, it's not hard to think this is where we get hurt at, right? So if you take that high intensity movement, we see a breakdown. From that, what do? We do constant variation, and we take a variation of good morning. And from that good morning, we do other smaller variations of good mornings. We take hip work and do other variations of that. Then we pick an accessory movement, and we bring high intensity to the execution of that accessory movement to fix the problem. What is one of the most common ways to create a mobility issue? Lack of strength somewhere. And whatever has a lack of strength is going to get overwhelmed when you're doing compound movements. And that usually that area will tighten up. It'll start to try to protect itself, and it'll create a mobility issue. So essentially what we're doing with this accessory movement is we are fixing a motor pattern fault, creating better movement, and strengthening the areas that were weak that caused the mobility issue, allowing us to regain the mobility substantially easier once our strength is there. And what are we using to do that? We're using high intensity, constantly varied accessory movements to strengthen an area and prehab something instead of wait until we get injured and rehab it.
It's like the max effort variance too, right? It's if you're always back squatting, so it's like, oh man, I really want to drive my back squat up. So I'm gonna start back squatting 3 times a week, 5 3s, 1s. Like you're just creating pattern overload, and you're reinforcing the same problem. So it's like, how can you just, vary some of that neurological demand, vary some of that, just the tension in the muscle tissue, like how much damage you're putting on the skeletal and the muscular structures of it. If you're doing the same stuff over and over, you will lead to wear and tear. I mean, that's why running has the highest rate of injury. It's not because running's not functional or it's bad for you. Is if you're not doing things to offset tremendous amounts of pattern overload, then you're going to start to lead to plasticization and all the other things that come along to that.
Well, it's, you're 100% right. And just to put it in easy terms for people, I try to explain this like with running. When you talk to some really ultra high level coaches and running, a lot, like some of the ones that I've really enjoyed listening to, they'll tell you about 25% of the person's training should be running, 75% should be other things. And they need to be strong enough to maintain perfect positions. And what I try to explain to people is when people run, at first they get better because they accommodate to what they're doing. They learn how to pace. They start to get in better shape. They lose a little bit of weight. They eat better for what they're doing, and they get better and better over time. Then there's a point where they have to do things to maintain perfect positions. And when they don't do these other things besides running, their hip flexors start to get tight, IT bands get tight, their glutes start to shut off, they start to have back issues, and all these things start to add up. And, I say you need to treat it like a car, right? Like if I was going to race a car, if I went and bought a Camaro and I raced it every day, after a while, the tires start to get bald, and the tires start to slip, and I run the slower time. Transmission starts to slip, I run a slower time. Needs a tune-up, I run a slower time. What I need to do is go to the track. What's the weakness? Tire spin. Okay, next time I go back to the track, I take the 6 best tires on the market for it, find which one I run the fastest time with. Now the car hooks up. I go back to the garage. I add power. I make the engine more powerful. I go back to the track. It hooks up. Go back, add more power. Go back to the track. It doesn't hook up anymore. I can't fit a wider tire on it. I change the suspension. Go back, dial the suspension in. Now I add power. It goes faster, hooks up. Add power, goes faster, and hooks up. Now I beef up the suspension. I beef up the frame. I beef up the rear end so that I don't damage anything. And it just needs to take the same process into running.
Yeah, we've actually had an interesting one. So one of our powerlifters back in February decided to run a 100-miler. And then not only run a 100-miler, but chose a particularly hard 100-miler. Nice. So over the course of from February to, I think it was 3 weeks ago, he switched from being about 210 body weight to 175 and going from 6 days a week powerlifting to 100-mile run. He was successful, went super well. He had a little wear and tear with the Achilles that when I look back at it now, I'm just like, man, I feel like we had done some stuff really well. So the further we got into his run training, and I didn't program his run training, the more we kind of pulled back on the lifting. And then the final 8 weeks, it seemed like he was just getting too much stimulus on the system. He was still hitting the 4 primary days, trying to balance out his running. His running volume was getting pretty substantial. And I said to him, hey, I think it's time to transition and just focus on task at hand for this next 8 weeks in the lead up to that race. And that's exactly what he did. About 4 weeks into that process, he started to have Achilles issues. And when I look back at it now, what I think about the most is that was a mistake on my part. And what I wish I would have done was saying, hey, let's cut those 4 primary days and let's stick to 2 accessory only days where the stimulus on the system is much lower than sort of that big compound movement. And we just have like these pieces that we're going to do, not to sort of necessarily improve sports performance, but just kind of like give some balance to the volume of work that he's otherwise doing that is so sports specific, and give just some accessory work to like take some of the pressure off those joints, work a little broader range of motion, try to maintain some of that joint health, muscle integrity, et cetera, that he's spent so many years building in that lead up to the race. And, you know, it's awesome that he was successful. He did a great job, like a ton of grit to pull that off. But I do wish that we would have made that one course correction. And one of the things that we've been working over the same period of time is, you know, because of the area we're in, we've got a ton of like heavy duty endurance athletes, and we've started to put out there, and we're just testing it right now, but a 2-day-a-week strength program that's like conjugate system, accessory only, but built specifically for endurance athletes. That is 1 hour of work twice a week. And the athletes so far that we've used it on, it's amazing. Like if you're a true endurance athlete and spend all your time outside, 2 hours a week of accessory work in the gym has made a pretty massive difference for the few people we've already implemented it on. And that's one of the pieces I'm looking like forward and excited to working like into over the next bunch of months, is expanding that and seeing what else you can accomplish. But again, like primarily accessory driven.
So I had this guy run a 2:34 marathon, and I knocked 10 minutes off his half marathon time in 7 weeks just by bringing accessories into his movements. Okay, maintain better positions, and we also brought sled work in to produce power for force for a longer, have a higher power produce more force for a longer period of time, right? And that was a huge component to it. But one of the things that Jesse was talking about, and when he's talking about bringing accessories in instead of having the speed work and the compound movements, is it leads to 80% of our volume is accessories. One of the reasons why 80% of our volume is accessories is because we recover substantially faster from accessory movements. From a max squat to a dynamic, or max lower to a dynamic lower, we need 72 hours for full recovery for our nervous system. Okay, we only need 24 hours to fully recover from accessory movements. So that's why even Jesse said sometimes, like, lifters who do a full workout in the morning, they come back, hit extra accessories in the evening to get extra volume in, because we can recover 24 hours later. By the next day at the same time, we're recovered if you're in good shape. And this is a thing where for us, you look at like CrossFit's the best generalist you can be. What people don't really think about is you have to improve your general fitness often to raise your specialized fitness, and vice versa. So this is where, like me as a specialist, as a coach, I can come into CrossFit, and we've gone farther down the rabbit hole in some of these extreme conditions, and we can bring some of those principles where people have glaring weaknesses in those areas. But as a specialist, I've also had to bring in the general side of it and bring over general fitness up for my specialist athletes, okay? And for us, it is very easy to change things when we can recover in 24 hours. We can put a lot of volume into areas and make a difference in a very short time period. So it is the fact that Jesse's talking about making accessories only at certain points, in certain stages of prep for an endurance event, that they can do it with fast recovery. These endurance athletes, if he's getting ready for a 100-mile event, yes, he's in good shape. He's going to recover very fast. So he'll be fully recovered by the same time the next day.
Yeah, definitely. Especially with that sled work too. That's not to be overlooked. I find sled has a massive input on endurance athletes, especially the longer they're out there. So if you go from an athlete who, instead of maybe 10K or half marathon, you start getting into marathon distance, or definitely for ultra is where you're starting to have an athlete move for, greater than 10 hours, that sled work is, especially for sport specific, like running, is a lot of your time is going to be spent on a power march. And there's nothing that makes you feel stronger power marching than a ton of sled work.
What do you do time domains when you have those kind of athletes? Like, just give people idea. Like, are you looking at now making these longer, like for a marathon athlete versus like, some of our football guys or powerlifter, we're going, 60 to 100 feet.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Shane's better to answer this question because he's done horrible things to people with the sleds. But usually for us, like for someone like Dan, who I was speaking about, like that's where something I like that 20 to 30 minute time domain for the most part. And then we've worked up to like 45 minutes. Like one of our guys climbed, was a lead guide on Everest a bunch of years ago. And he found the sled work really high value for his time in the mountains. He would do like a hard march with 90 pounds for 45 minutes. But I know Shane's done like substantially more.
Yeah, we've gone pretty far. I've had 2.5 hour sled drags easily. Louis used to pull 5-6 miles. He'd do 5 plates for 5 miles on a sled drag.
His strength training book, he talks about it. He would do he would talk about some of the athletes. They would wear a vest and ankle weights and drag a sled for 1 to 3 miles, then strip the vest, or to go another 2-3 miles, strip the ankle weights, go another. To try to make it what he was trying to do is fit the volume in, but not the same amount of force. So you're keeping the time domains high, but you're not, establishing the same amount of impact on the body.
I'll give a quick example of something I've done, and then I think we should have sled drag as one of our podcasts, and we'll get back to the other sectors. Now, the sled drag is an accessory, so we'll talk about it real quick and move on from that. But one of the things I said, I had that marathon runner that knocked 10 minutes off his half marathon time. He's a 2:34 marathon runner, so that's flying, right? So what we ended up doing is the first day he came in, I got his heart rate up to 135 beats a minute. We just used an air assault bike, and I put him on a sled. And at this time, we only had 25 pounds on the sled. And I told him, like, what we're going to do is we're going to pull to either his heart rate hit 185, or he was about to break technique, and I want him to stop before he broke technique. Okay. So at this point, it didn't take him long. It's only 36 minutes, which I was actually shocked. I thought it would be about an hour and 15 minutes or so. And he stops because his heart rate was jacked up. It was right at 185. So he stopped. 7 weeks later, before I had him run this half marathon, I ended up having a 26-pound vest on, 12-pound ankle weights. We had 2 45-pound plates and a 25, so 90 pounds more. We did the same thing on the air assault bike. And at this time, it took him so he was at 34. He was at an hour and 34, 36 minutes. He was over an hour and a half before his heart rate hit 185. Okay. Now your heart rate doesn't lie. There's nothing we can do. Like, it does not lie to you. So basically, he could produce force for longer periods of time. What you should do, though, if you were a coach and you're working at different distances, is you want to kind of work in time domains, and you want to see it pay off for the athlete. Like, we don't want to go too far. We don't want to go too short. And something as simple as you could walk, say distances, say if you have sometimes a 15-minute 5K, you can come up with a weight for 15 minutes that they power walk with. And then if they can do more weight for that same time, for the same distance, they're going to run faster. If they can power walk and they can cover that distance, slightly faster, the same distance, they're going to run faster literally every single time. Okay. So you should track, log distances, times, and then obviously how much carryover did it have to the event to really dial it in for your athletes. And eventually you'll be able to create a whip. We've talked about this before. A whip is a series of movements or accessories or exercises that you can, from that combination of movements, exactly the output for the event that the athlete's doing. And then what you do is you figure out how to increase every one of those movements inside that whip, and then guaranteed every time they're going to run faster, lift more weight.
Yeah. So one of the things we were talking about the endurance athletes and, some of the demands that they face with the pattern overload. And I feel like this was a big thing that kind of happened with the CrossFit competitors is it just became more and more metcons, or you're doing 3 days of Olympic weightlifting, you're doing 2 days of strength, and you're doing, 2 to sometimes 4 metcons a day. And, a lot of those movements are the same. So a lot of times below parallel, overhead, hanging from bars. So the same way, like you get that same pattern overload from getting, thousands and thousands of running repetitions. I think we start to see that with what happens with some of the CrossFit athletes. You see people's backs get blown up, where all of a sudden it seizes up and they've got to, rest or shoulders or knees. These are common areas that get overused where now the athlete has to back off. And, a lot of times it's just that repetitive overload where it's like, yeah, maybe just back off some of the Metcons, program in some of that accessory work to build up the opposite sides of those joints and create better balance than just continuing to do the same, pattern over and over and over.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot of key components to this. And, one of the things, like you said, 80% of our volume for us is accessory movements, okay? But you have so many movement patterns in CrossFit, and a lot of the things we do to fix one will fix many of the different faults that exist out there. But one of the key things for constant progression for an athlete is constant variation, just like CrossFit prescribes. And we have to introduce 15% or more new movements to athletes every year for them to be able to learn new movements at the fastest rate possible. So it's also a key component. And one of the easy ways for CrossFit coaches or for strength coaches to do that is variation through accessory movements as well. Okay, so it just makes it easier for coaches. It gets one more tool. If all you could do is bring variation just through CrossFit workouts, like that, you get someone who's creative, yeah, no problem. But it makes it easier to have more tools available to have variation in there, okay? That's a key component. So 15% new movements every year. We want to use our accessory movements to recover because we can recover in 24 hours. So we can increase our volume substantially and correct patterns real quick. Accessory movements can be done once a week for a body part. It can be done 6 days a week for a body part. It literally depends on what the goal of the athlete is, where they're at, how bad their weakness is. We're trying to cue movement faults out of people. You can also look at people's structures. I know you guys have seen this plenty of times. I've seen a lot of CrossFit athletes that have really thick spinal erectors, very low, just right above the butt, right? But then it looks like nothing from the rest of the way up. If I've never even seen this person lift before, I already know where their weakness is. I already know where they're gonna drop their chest at. I already know where they could get injured at. I need the spinal erectors to be even all the way up. Okay. And, then I've seen people with really thick spinal erectors from top to bottom, except for right at the bottom. And I've seen this, only twice, but the individuals both had big, thick muscular glutes, thick spinal erectors, but right at the bottom of the spinal erectors and glutes, it was soft and there was no tissue there. And that's where they're going to get hurt at. Okay. So you can also look at what the leverages are and you can see imbalances as well. There's a lot of ways to decipher these things, but the biggest thing I think, once you understand what we utilize these things for, how to use them is, how do we put them into practice? Like, how do we fix it? How do we structure it?
For us, the way we structure it is we'll have a tendency to get through that primary and get through our secondary, which would be our first piece that feeds that primary movement pattern, and then into accessory after that. Now, for an upper body day, I like to actually have about 7 movements in there total. So this would include the primary piece through to the very end of our work. That seems to manage our session. This is for, someone who's really committing to lifting, right? This is going to be about an hour, 45 minutes of work. And then the same thing on the lower day is about an hour, 45 minutes of work. And that's about 6 pieces. I find it just a little bit slower working through a low body day and a little bit heavier on the nervous system overall. So we do 6 movements on a lower and 7 on an upper. So if you think about sort of, let's say we're going to max out a box squat as our primary piece, then we're going to get into, let's say we do drop sets. I would count that. So I'd say drop sets, like 3 reps at 70%, and 2 more sets of 3, increasing or staying the same depending on the athlete's needs. And then let's say we fit good mornings in after that. So good mornings and on a heavy day. So I like those reps from 5 to 8. That's what we'll do for most all of our work for good mornings, 4 sets of 5 to 8 reps, increasing in weight. And then we're getting into sort of the next pieces, which for us would be predominantly like glute ham raise, reverse hyper, ATP, and we're wrapping up with a midline. And that's going to be sort of our movements in that order, depending a little bit on the athlete. So there is wiggle room in there to bias that order based off what that athlete's trying to work through. So we might all work together and get through the squat because that's our first piece. We might all work together and get through the good mornings, but then next might be more room for interpretation. So if we were going to do like ATP or belt squat work in a little higher volume, but it's athletes who are looking for like that stimulus over like more leg drive stimulus over like glute ham raise. So for an athlete who's lagging on hamstrings, we might go straight to glute ham raise. For an athlete who needs that sort of leg drive, we might go to ATP or belt squat next, and then change the order a little bit, just depending on prioritizing those movements. And then midline is how we'd always finish that out. With the sets and reps, for the most part, on heavy days, we kind of go lower reps. And on the dynamic days, we think about more repetition methods. So that's where we might get those higher volume sets of 15, sets of 20, up to sets of, 100 to several hundred reps on something like a flat bench band hamstring curl, standing ankle weight hamstring curl piece like that. That seems to be like where you need hundreds, or it's maybe best practices for that. Shane, what do you find you do?
For us, we're right around the same amount of exercises in selection. Really, I think I try to wrap my thought process on rep schemes by what is the goal. So let's say we have a power lifter who decides like, hey, like structurally, they need to be heavier, they need to be thicker, more muscular. They're just too tall for the body weight that they're at. So in the off season for lower body, as an example, this is when we're going to bring in rep schemes right around 20 reps, like 15 to 25. This is traditionally where we see bodybuilders like rep range to build size in their legs and lower body. Upper body for most people is like 8 to 12, somewhere around there for muscle mass. So I'll have people right around the 20 rep range, give or take, say 5 reps often if they're trying to build muscle mass. Then, if I have, say, an athlete who is getting close to a competition and they cannot gain any weight whatsoever, I have someone who's like going after a world record. They're on the edge of their weight class. They're barely going to make weight. I'll go to 5 to 8s. I might do sets of 5, like real heavy glute ham raises, or sets of, for sets of 5. It could be any accessory movement, but I'm going to stick it to the 5 to 8 rep range to not put additional muscle mass on them. So I think it is good. The conjugate system is constantly varied, right? And what CrossFit does is constant variation. And constant variation is not just your movement. It's also your education, okay? So it doesn't hurt to see what top pro bodybuilders are doing out there. And what I mean by that is, as an example, it's just a good way to say, okay, what rep schemes build muscle mass? Does my athlete need to increase muscle mass? Well, we might need to live in that area for a little bit. Okay. Once we have the muscle mass desired, like this is now, they're leveraged optimally. First, as a coach, you must build your athlete to be built perfect for the sport. Once they're built perfect for the sport, then you can polish and hone the special exercises and the qualities they need to optimize them and optimize their output for their build and structure. And so for us, it's the same way. I tend to break it up like max effort lower. I'll do max effort lower. I like to do a lot of, I'll do hamstring and like hip and glute work. Dynamic effort lower, that's the day that I like to do more spinal erector and hamstring work. And then I also obviously will put quad work in there too. Quad work we don't do as much on. Like you look at a lot of CrossFitters, we do so much stuff in narrow stance that quad development's phenomenal. Posterior chain is where we're lacking. So that is where our effort is put into, is the posterior chain. But we will do enough quad to optimize our athlete's structure and optimize their output. So I look at rep schemes as what is the quality needed for the athlete. Now, like when Jessica's talking about the 100, 200, 300 plus reps or time domains, like, moving a weight for 3 to 5 minutes to see who can, how much weight can you move for 3 to 5 minutes on a movement. These we use as finishers, and our finishers are designed to help us recover at a faster rate of speed so we can handle a higher volume of training. Then we handle a higher volume of training, we can make changes faster in our athlete. So these are recuperation methods. You will actually not be as sore and recover substantially faster during these high rep ranges. The benefit, though, is in CrossFit. Not hard to think. You're doing a 20-minute AMRAP, your rep schemes might get pretty high by the end of it, and you might reduplicate a movement in a high rep scheme. So it's important for us when I look at accessories, our accessories in my mind usually go from 4 reps to about 300 reps, okay? 3 to 5 minute time zones sometimes on a movement. So there's a big variation there, right? But when you hit PRs, you have a personal record on something that means something to you. And every time I try to break a PR, I treat my accessory as important as my main movement. If I want to break a world record deadlift, every accessory I do is as important, probably more important than the main movement. If I could get it from the main movement, I would have already gotten it from the main movement. I'm going to do it through accessories, so I'm going to hit those accessories like blood and guts, everything I got, and that is going to transfer to a higher movement. So don't forget to bring the intensity. I've worked with games champions, teams that have podium in the games. And one of the things that I found that, Jesse and Chris and I have talked about, is it was really interesting to me that I've watched people that hit a main movement, Olympic lift, a main movement, gymnastics movements, their metcons, all the stuff, the intensity was incredible. And they went to accessory movements and they just made their way through it. I felt like I was walking through Planet Fitness, and I'm like, these people are not scared of intensity, and they know what intensity is. But I think sometimes we get an introduction to a sport or to fitness. Maybe that introduction was a global gym and it's got a typical bodybuilding workout. And maybe you worked at a certain intensity, right? That you've seen the people around you. So you acclimated to what you saw around you. One of the nice things about CrossFit is when you go to a CrossFit gym, one of the key components is intensity. So now your atmosphere is ultra high intensity, right? And I think that's what happens, is that's why they don't mind doing the Metcons intense. A 1 rep max we know is going to be intense, and everybody wants to improve their 1 rep max. The highest form of intensity you can get is a 1 rep max. So their maxes are very intense. But the accessories, I think they sometimes fall victim to what they thought accessories were supposed to be. But we had to bring the same level of intensity that would bring to any Metcon that we do, any max effort movement that we would do to achieve the result we want out of the accessory movements that we have. So make sure your execution is just as important as the way you lay out your programming. We have to execute to the highest intensity that we can, to fix the problems that we're trying to fix.
Similar to CrossFit, that intensity is based off of quality, consistency, intensity in that same order, so that it's not only do you have to work intensely, the quality has to be very high. One of the things that I've always thought that I appreciate about bodybuilders is their ability to identify a weak muscle group, build it up in a very isolated way, and then also maintain symmetry in that pattern. And for them, you'll hear those guys talk about making sure that you feel the muscle working you're trying to work. And it's really important. I think intensity and quality really need to go hand in hand on that accessory. So not only are you really engaged in it, like this is something you're definitely not having a conversation while doing reps. Like you are working at capacity like you would in a Metcon, and you're thinking about the value, like the value and the quality of that are critical. It has to be done well, and it has to be done at high intensity.
And you said, when you're looking at that, you get a PR on a 1 rep, you get a PR on a 4 rep, 5 rep, 8 rep, 10, 12, 15, 20, 25, 50, 100, 200, 300 reps. When you have PRs in this and you're doing this for after a few years, these personal records mean something, and you remember them, and you attack them and you beat them, you start to learn your body really well. You know exactly what you can do before you start to blow up, before you start to get a pump, before you go too far and you're just not going to recover enough time to end that workout. So it translates very well into helping CrossFit athletes fully understand what they can do at different rep schemes and weights. And I think it helps them game their workouts a little bit better and have just a full understanding of what they're actually capable of. That's a huge key component to what we do as well, that we have to have. That mind-muscle connection is not just for bodybuilders. When you show up to the CrossFit Games, it's a wonderful thing. You might have a gymnastics movement that we've never done before. You might have an apparatus we've never touched before. You might have an individual do a strongman movement that they're not really familiar about, or the apparatus they use for that strongman event is completely different than the one they train on. You get a farmer's walk. Well, you get a farmer's walk by Rogue, and they have a set standard size, and that's cool. Maybe they get a farmer's walk where the implement's 8 foot long. The handle is 2 foot long, so you have to make sure you grab it right in the center. Maybe the grip's twice as thick as what you're used to using. All these things make changes, but the individual who's had more variety, just like CrossFit talks about constant variation, but this accessories allows us to bring even more variety in, and they've had more rep schemes and time zones that they've attacked, the easier it is and the better their mind-muscle connection is, they can make micro adjustments to have a higher success rate. They might recognize a little faster their grip is slightly uneven and slightly off, and then the way they're carrying the load is not going to be optimal to make the distance that they're going to. So these things are key components, and it is only really brought on when these accessory movements. It's so much easier. Like if you're squatting a max rep, it is very hard to feel every muscle group and exactly what it's doing because your whole body's straining, right? But when you do a single joint movement and it's a non-complex movement, you can hyper focus on that and you get a good feeling, good contraction. And we want these athletes to be able to be as aware of their whole body as possible, to know if they're lacking something, but also to make these micro adjustments that at the highest level are ultra important for success.
One of the things that I have definitely started doing the last while is the same way that CrossFit main site will put compare to date for a benchmark workout. I'll do that for accessory work. So for accessory work, like it's common for us to waive something for a 2 or 3 week cycle if I feel like I could get more out of it. So good mornings, like we would do 4 sets of 5 increasing in weight for 2 or 3 weeks. We might do the same thing with almost any movement, like GH raise. You could do the same thing and increase band tension or chain tension or adjust the reps, like, increase the reps, a couple reps each week. But if it's something that we've done before, then I would reference that date. So I'll scroll back in programming, look and say, compare these, 40-40. So increasing between set 1 and 2, reverse hyper to July 15th, 2021. And they can actually go back and reference that if they've recorded that information, compare to, be like, oh, can I show not only an improvement in my primary work, but also if I've tracked it well and then have a date reference, which, a good coach and programmer should have all that data, be able to provide that number and then make choices based off that where, okay, well, a year ago or 3 months ago, I did, 320 for the reverse hyper. I'm going to see if we can load to 340 for my first set today. So it's not just always a guessing game, because guessing game does cut into training time. And if you've got numbers from before, then you have something to work off of and compare to. And if we can just bump that total volume in that sets and reps by knowing or having some data to work off of, then we are better. We are moving in the right direction.
Your PRs have to be important to you. You have to either remember them because they mean enough to you. At first, when you're new, it's hard to remember. But the longer you've been going, the more training means to you, the easier it is to remember your PRs. But if not, write them down, track them, figure out the best way to do that for yourself. Because, it's not just like, it's great. Like Jesse's saying, like, go for that 5-pound PR, go for that rep PR. If I tell a client, I want you to do 8 reps, let's hit as heavy as we can go for 8 reps. If they're at a weight, I also let them know if they're at a weight where they can't make the 5-pound jump on dumbbells to go to the next one, I'd rather see 9 or 10 reps. I don't want to see 8. I want to see that rep scheme go up, because I might find that on this particular movement, after they hit 11 or 12 reps, they can actually go 5 pounds heavier now on this movement. And then I can start tracking that, and I know how many reps they need to do. Now you're ready for this. Now they know they're ready for it as well. So I don't have to talk them to go, I believe in you. You can do this. Like, well, they know they can because the rep scheme matches the jump that's going to happen next. So, little things like that are important to build an athlete. But you also, when you're going into your accessories, you want to pick numbers as if it was important as a meet. So when we pick numbers for a deadlift, for a squat, my squat doesn't magically happen on a PR, right? Like I don't just like work. I'm like, whoa, I think it's there today. Let's go for it, right? I set up all my numbers to get a 5-pound PR. Now, once I hit about 90%, I might say, hey, you know what? Today's an off day. It's not there. I'm going to hit the biggest weight I can without missing a weight. But I'm set up for a 5-pound PR. I set up my accessories the same way. Okay. I expect if I am building up each set by my 3rd or 4th set, however many sets I'm doing, that's what I'm going for. Okay. So set yourself up for success by knowing the numbers ahead of time before you go into that workout, and set up your attempts accordingly.
I think the big thing we hear, the execution is really, really important. The ability to assess which movement. So what do we look at movement prescription wise? And, I think this is where now the education of the trainer and the athlete need to kind of be there. So if you have specific faults, so say, for example, you can't get or not even a fault, but maybe just a general weakness. So let's say you go to set up for the deadlift and you go to pull and you get the bend in the bar, but the plates don't break. Everything else stays the same. what kind of processes mentally, like you guys right there, what are you thinking right now?
Okay. So, like in a deadlift, if an athlete can't get the bar off the ground, first thing I'm going to look at is position. Okay. So if their technique is perfect, then I'm going to start looking at, then I know what muscle groups are weak. Okay. So most of the time, like say in a deadlift, if the person can't break the weight off the ground, they're actually trying to turn it too much into an Olympic lift and getting their hips too low. So if they let their hips come up a little higher, you will see that they tend to break off the ground faster. So I'll look at speed days for that, and I'll put them on doubles or triples. And what you'll see is if they do a triple and their second and third rep, their hips are higher than the first one, that's where their leverages are optimized. The first rep, they manufacture a position. They're going off what they think they're supposed to do, but usually they're not correct. And so the second and third one, what happens on the second rep is you lower the weight and your body will figure out the strongest position to lower the weight leverage-wise. And then they'll reduplicate that and the second, third rep will be faster. If that's not the case, if the technique is dead on, then the first muscle group we look at is your abs, your midline. If your midline is weak, you're going to lose, and especially if I see the spine bow, then I know that we either don't know how to properly brace or that individual doesn't have strong enough midline. Most of the time it's going to be both. Okay. If you didn't train to have strong enough midline to do the work you're doing, you also probably don't know how to brace for the deadlift properly. Okay. So I will go over and discuss the technique in bracing for that midline. And then, obviously we're going to get them to brace, have them reduplicate the lift. If the same thing happens, then we know this is all accessory movements. So we're going to look at midline. We're talking about core to extremity acceleration. There you go, core to extremity acceleration. So midline needs to be there. Second muscle group I look at will be hamstrings. Okay. So those are the two muscle groups that in that order when it comes to getting weight off the ground for a deadlift.
Is there specific movements? So like, are you looking at deficits at that point? Are you looking at maybe widening the hands a little bit? Like what sort of movements specifically?
For me, when I'm looking at deadlift, okay, first, like I said, say the deadlift's optimized. Yeah, I like deficit deadlift variations. So it can be a deficit deadlift for max. We can do speed deficit deadlift variations. We can do stiff leg variations at a deficit. But, I'm looking at either sumo or conventional demos. I like using, we can, use them banded. Sometimes I'll just do stiff leg deadlifts, just the bottom half only, just to get that drive off the ground. Glute ham raises, most CrossFit gyms have them for GHD. Do glute ham raises, but we need to do them properly. Okay, I suggest you watch a video on my Instagram for that. But we want to do them properly. We don't want to drop our upper body and rebound to gain momentum. We don't want our hips shooting back. Literally, the only thing that should happen is your back should be straight up and down, and at your knees, that should be the only place it moves. You should come straight out, straight back up. That's it. And one nice thing about the GHD is if the person's feet are pointing straight down, which they should be, if their hamstrings are weak, as they do reps, their toes will start to go out because they're trying to find new tissue to contract because they're losing the battle in the tissue that they're utilizing, okay? So let's say if I ask 20 reps of somebody for a glute ham raise, they get 10 reps in, their toes start going out. Well, that's also something I can pay attention to also, because if I do my job and I pick my accessories correctly and I increase their hamstring strength, that 10 reps turns into 12, into 15, into 18, and so eventually all 20 reps, they stay perfectly lined and straight down. So yeah, any of your stiff leg, Dimmel variations, deficit, regular variations. I love max band tension, rack pulls from like mid shin. Those I like a lot. Any glute ham work, inverse curl work, that is all important. And that also we'll talk about, obviously finish talking about different movement patterns and places where we see weaknesses. And then we'll talk about the equipment that we can utilize too, as well to help overcome some of these issues.
I would agree with that for sure. From the floor, if it welds itself to the floor, it's usually the athlete wussed out before they even headed down, or they're out of position, especially if it's a sumo. Like if that's a sumo pull and it's welded, like unless they made a ridiculous jump, it's usually one of those two things. And so both of those, I like the idea of building that pattern, like we talked about on dynamic on the last episode. Is that for me is speed pulls. Like it's actually going to be, you need to sort of like get them comfortable and reconstruct that position off speed pulls, build confidence in that setup and that aggressive movement off the floor. Past that, yeah, like I agree with Shane that it's going to be predominantly midline driven off the floor if everything else is kind of equal. It can be quad as it's that, you know, on a conventional, if the quads are pulling the knees back out of the way initially, but that's still going to come down to like, if they have a massive strength in their midline, they'll be able to support that load whilst the quads sort of like draw the knees back and clear the path to the bar. But then because of that is you're looking at what the midline looks like at the end of those sessions. So what are they doing? Are they getting to it? It's very common for us, you know, and it sucks because it's kind of become a bit of a joke in the gym, is that people like to skip the midline and then, oh, I'll do it at home, which is funny enough. But at the same time, you're like, that's going to be an injury. Mm-hmm. Like if you're skipping midline, like I don't put it in to fill the last 5 minutes of class. Like the midline work is going in because it is really important, and it fits nicely at the end of a session because it's a nice spot to finish out. Finishing on midline is my most favorite for how I program, because you can just put full effort into it and know that is the last thing on your list, and the session is done, minus some like restoration and mobility work. But that midline work, like you've talked about before, is not only is it the classic like plank high rep work, but it's also that very low rep work and really fighting to engage under heavy duress and maintain those positions, because often in there is the solution to error off the floor.
You know, we do 1 rep, 3 rep, 5 rep maxes on abs, and people look like, what the heck? When you do it, it's a brace. It's a violent brace. You don't get that burn, you know, that you do in high rep. It's a violent brace. And the faster you can contract your abs, the safer you can keep your spine. So we will hit maxes, and then we'll take a percentage of those maxes and also do speed work with the same movements for our abs, so we can track, you know, your abs, your midline, that muscle tissue is just like every other body part, right? You can make it stronger. You can increase absolute strength. You can increase force rate production on it. You can, you know, your high reps, we usually leave our high reps into our CrossFit workouts. So that way, you know, because those tend to be higher rep. So we leave them there, and then we do our maxes and speed work and oblique work. And obliques, the stronger obliques are, the faster you can fire your hips. Name a sport that hips aren't important. It's extremely important to be able to fire your hips fast and hard. You know, so, you know, Jesse has a, you know, great point about that. But one of the things too, I didn't mention, you know, just kind of came to me. I was teaching a course one time, and one of the problems that you can have for a deadlift off the ground is what I'm about to talk about. And the coach came up to me, and he's a good coach, and he became a phenomenal coach. But this is a little earlier in his career, and he was like, you know, hey, I got this guy. He, you know, got a massive squat, good bench. He's just strong everywhere, but his deadlift is just really behind his squat. And he's like, man, he goes, this guy just pound for pound, he is so strong. And I was like, oh, pound for pound. So I'm like, he's a lightweight lifter, right? He's a small guy. So I was like, oh, so pound for pound. I was like, so he's a small guy. He goes, yeah. And he tells me his body weight, and he tells me his lifts. And he's like, but his deadlift is X amount. I'm like, how small is he? He's like, yeah, he's pretty small. I was like, yeah, like little hands and stuff. He's like, yeah, he could make fun of his hands. Like, he's like, just like talking about some of the things they joke about with him, you know? I was like, cool. So he stared at his hands and make fun of him all the time. But I was like, you never thought about maybe it's his grip and he can't hold on to the bar? And he's like, looks at me and goes, are you kidding me? I'm like, hey, you know, the thing about it is this coach was good, right? He's like, here's what we're doing for his midline. Here's what we've done for his hamstrings. Here's what we've done for spinal erectors. He's like, I've trained everything I can think of, like posterior chain. This guy, he's like, I'm like, yeah, the guy's got a big squat. I doubt his posterior chain is really weak, right? But when you tell me pound for pound, I think light. When I think light, I think hand size can be small. If hand size is small, then, you know, like I have athletes, like everybody, all my strength athletes do grip work. But if I see someone who like, whoa, they have great leverages, but they have small hands, before it ever becomes a problem, we're going to do so much grip work, it's not even funny, because I have to outrun the increase in performance that's coming their way for the deadlift, okay? So if they can't hold on to the bar, you know, you don't see people grab the bar and they go to pull and it stays on the ground pin and they rip off and they fall backwards. You don't see that. You'll see it come off the ground a little bit and rip out of their hands, but your body will slow down if it knows that bar is going to come out of your hands, because it's trying to not leave the ground in that fast of a manner. It's trying to leave the ground in a manner that it can still stay in your hands. Mm-hmm. So you also have to look at what is the strength on this individual's hands, or what is the size of the hands on the individual? And that could also be one of the issues.
Small fish.
Yeah, especially grip, man. That is a road that takes time in sort of what we've experienced.
Mm-hmm. Yep, definitely.
What are some other things you guys? Some common things you think you guys see? Just common faults. I mean, we talked a little bit. Knees collapsing. That's obviously one we see.
Oh man, knees collapsing on the squat.
Yeah,
that's arguably
Squats,
other
jumps,
than
push presses. You name it.
Yeah.
Balls.
I think outside of like rounding the back on the dead, like knees failing in on the squat is, I mean, it's got to be the most common. I reckon
that's actually the biggest one I go into. So if you look at, I've all taught a lot of courses and gone places, but you look at like obviously since box squat is one of the things we go over in our course, squatting is one of the things, and it's a wide stance. Well, the problem is like whatever we do or whatever we don't do, we're not good at, right? So if you look at CrossFit in general, most of the movements are very close, narrow stance, right? And this is where that variety needs to kind of increase, is that constant variation. Is we have to get into a wider stance, because otherwise we're not going to have the mobility for it. Most CrossFit athletes that I've run across lack the mobility in their hips to achieve positions I want them to. Okay, so when we're looking at one, we have to fix the mobility issue, but the mobility issue showed up because of a lack of strength. So if they go into a wide stance like box squats, they're going to work their hips harder and they're going to work their hamstrings, which are the two areas that we really need them to work to be able to handle wide stance movements. And for people who think like, we don't train it much, but it doesn't show up much in competition. Really? Do they ever stone load? Because you don't see someone, you can't narrow stance. You got to be on the outside of the stone, to be able to do this. Or heavy sandbags. It exists. You will get there. It just won't be frequent, but that's okay. I'm not asking you to do wide stance squats or sumo deadlifts because I think that's going to be the new latest, greatest thing at CrossFit competitions. I'm asking you to do that to increase your variance, to avoid weaknesses and avoid injury. When you go wide stance in your squat, like I said, you are spreading the floor apart. This is working your hips. If you go to a box squat at parallel, you're going to use your hamstrings a lot more. So hamstrings and the hips, this will allow you to keep your knees out even on your narrow stance squats. So, that's very important to be able to do that. Okay. So, I want that variation to fortify you. When we deadlift, so typically at my gym, you'll spend equal amount of time sumo and conventional, no matter which way you pull more in. Some athletes, I'll actually have them do more volume in the opposite stance. It just depends on where I see their weaknesses. But for me, it's one of those things that if you're a sumo deadlifter and you are, so you're going to be, sumo deadlifters are port getting weight off the ground, port locking weight out. They're phenomenal in the middle. Conventional pullers are phenomenal at getting weight off the ground, phenomenal at locking weight out, but they're poor in the middle. So when you train both of them, it takes care of the weaknesses in the other lift. Okay. So don't think of I'm doing a wide stance squat because I'm wide stance squatting from now on. Think of I'm going to do a wide stance squat to be able to produce more force in that position and produce force at a faster rate of speed. So anytime I'm in these positions, I have higher output and higher capacity. And now I don't have a glaring weakness that will create a mobility issue.
I think that wide stance box squat is such an easy way to fix that knee movement or lack of strength of the hips for a CrossFitter. We've Ellie Turner's up here with us this last month, living in the house and training with us, and we've actually been focusing on that with her, is getting her feet out real wide and working that box squat. She's not a bad squatter by any stretch, but it's been really exciting to watch her position develop. And we maxed out a 4-inch camber with chain the other day, and just like solid, toes are out under the R3 rack, nice, solid box squat position. Looks like $1 million. And that's we've just been implementing that work. And, we're not using it, like you said, to make her a better box squatter or make her a better wide stance or sumo athlete. We're using this to directly contribute to her success on squat patterns inside of the ones utilized in CrossFit. We're just not going to hit her with, she's already crushing huge volume, wall balls, front squats, squat clean, squat snatch. She's spending a ton of time in squat, and she's been doing that for several years, and it hasn't changed some of the mechanics of that position. So then because of that, you're like, well, then let's look at other options or what else we could do to feed that. and watching something develop and make a massive, like we've seen such great change for 4 weeks of effort. Like, man, that's fucking awesome. Right. Mm-hmm. It's just fun.
Yeah. I have a saying, with a lot of my athletes, that difficulty describes need. If you can't get your feet out wide, then it's showing you have a deficiency in somewhere. So it's, and mobility may be part of it, which I think you see a lot of is, and just like you said, I think Shane, to that point, is strength, because you'll see people that can do hip circle bands and push their knees out with their toes straight forward. And it's like, well, yeah, let's think about what the demand of the tissues. Higher rep, more strength endurance, but can it contract maximally? Can it really drive it out? And again, that difference rep schemes and those heavier loads are going to train the hips in a much different way. Not to say hip circles are bad. They're fine. They're great for warm-ups and can even be awesome for some finisher stuff to kill some things if, you need to, or belt squats are, obviously better, or belt squat machine. But yeah, if you can't get your feet wide and move, your hips are not operating at their maximal capacity.
I like lateral sled drags for that too, for hips. That works great. It's something most gyms have a sled. Lateral sled drags work phenomenal.
Love sleds for sure.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, no matter what the issue is, like I said, just go through a checklist with yourself. Is the person able to attain the position? Then if they are, the mobility's there. If they're not, address that first. They might have a mobility issue and a strength issue, but you might not find out exactly what that strength issue is until that mobility issue is fixed. Now, if I know that their hip mobility is horrible, trust me, the first thing I'm going to do, I'm attacking the hips, I'm attacking the hamstrings no matter what, because I know that is just a recipe for success. But as they regain more access to new tissue, so when that joint can load properly and has full function in the joint, you will optimize the leverages inside that joint, which will allow you to move more weight overall. And once that happens, you might start to find little fine ways that you need to fine tune that strength in those positions. And then once you spend a little bit of time in those new positions, your strength's going to increase rapidly. Okay. But, no matter what, even if I don't know exactly how far the strength issue is because the mobility is so bad, I know the mobility is there because of a lack of strength. So I'm going to hit that no matter what. And that's going to be my key to this. Now, if you are constantly varied in your accessory movements, you literally shouldn't run into any of these issues. Or if you do this long enough, you've been doing this for a year or two, you shouldn't run into them. Think of these accessory movements like prehab. We're doing it so we don't develop any problems. We don't want to wait till it's rehab, right? So, but if we're constantly varied, just like if you lay out CrossFit training optimally, you're not going to get repetitive motion injuries because you're not using the same areas too much. You're going to create a balance, which is going to lower injury rate and optimize performance. And it's the same thing for accessories, except for it's just like the difference is we're attacking something with a scalpel, right? We first, like the generalist part is like a machete, right? And now we're going down with a scalpel, and we're fine tuning, our sculpture, and we're fine tuning our output.
A piece to add to that picture for sure is inside of that intensity. I've also had athletes who are like, well, I'm already using 30-pound dumbbells for my, skull crushers. You're like, how much more is there to gain? And you're like, that can also be a miss, is understanding what heavy is. So for people who are new to these patterns and accessory work, and coaches who are new to these patterns and accessory work, it's really worth looking and seeing what's out there, or talking with other coaches who use those movements more frequently for how heavy is heavy, because some of that actually requires a reevaluation. Good mornings, I would say, are a fantastic example of that, because, as a listener right now, take a second to think about, if you're a CrossFitter or a sport athlete, what would be an appropriate weight for you or your athletes to be able to use for a set of 5 rep good mornings? Like when you think of that number, whatever you're thinking of, what number would you pick for that, Shane?
I'll give you an example. I got at my gym today, 870-pound good morning. So if you think that a 1,000-pound squatter is doing a good morning around, depending on their leverages, 700 to 800 pounds, I would think that if you want to be a 500-pound squatter, 350, 400-pound good morning, like 350 probably right around there or so. So it has to be everybody's going to be a little different depending on their build. You get someone with a short trunk, long trunk, where their strength's at. You see some people with big, wide hips. And then, what variation are they doing? But, it's a lot higher than you think. Trust me, it shouldn't be really, really far behind your deadlift,
for us, so our 500 to 600 pound squatters, their 3 rep max good morning would be around 400 pounds, depending on the bar. And their 5 rep would be into that low to mid 300s. For CrossFit athletes, what I've seen is it's very acceptable for a good CrossFit athlete to be able to do a good morning in the high 200s, low 300s, and be squatting in that 450 to 500 range and deadlifting in that 550 to 600 pound range for fellas. For women, that good morning around 200 is a number that I would look towards for a 5 rep.
Oh, shock. That was definitely one of my things when I first started going through some of the kanji and seeing what Westside was doing. I was like, whoa, wait, what? Like, conventionally, or, the conventional, training wisdom was like, those are just done at, 135 for like 10 reps. But I mean, what do you see? A lot of people with weak backs. And to me, like, this important part of accessory also, like, hey, you got somebody, I got a, competitive athlete, black back blows up almost every time. It's like deadlifts and burpees. So what are you doing? Lots of reverse hypers, lots of good mornings. Like, if you just start attacking that area, if you can good morning close to what you're deadlifting, like, something tells me your back's going to do just what it needs to do when it needs to do it.
Those side to sides that you do on a GHD, face down, and you go side to side, shoulder to hip. Like, I have a guy that's done a 110 pound dumbbell. He does 4 sets of 20 per side with a 110 dumbbell holding right here. Like, that's decently strong feeling when you pick up that kind of weight. Like, a lot of people, if they haven't done it before, a set of 20 is just hard enough to do 4 sets of 20. To hold a heavy dumbbell, like right here, 110 pound plus dumbbell, that's a lot of weight, Yeah.
Yep. And I think for expanding on that, then, like, stuff like GH raise, like for our athletes and our sport athletes and our CrossFitters, good is a GHD on a 10-inch box. So decline GHD, so 10-inch lift on the backside, and a 20-pound weight vest for sets of like 10 to 20 reps a set, accumulating about 60-ish reps in a sort of over the sets and reps.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to have any CrossFit athlete who couldn't do at least 100 nonstop. That should be a given. I have a guy that's a 300-pound guy that will do a set of 100 perfect glute ham raises as a warm up before we start leg day. That's heavy. That's strong. That's real strong.
Yeah,
that's his warm up. Okay, that's one of the things he does to warm up. And so the thing is, like, I would tell you, like, for your body weight, whatever you think strong is an accessory, it's usually your goal should be 3 to 4 times that. It sounds stupid, but like, you will see some people move some serious weight. Lou was a low 200-pound guy. If you look at him, like, around 212 pounds, I think it was like when he was 56 or in his mid 50s, he did I think a set of 6, it was right around 6 reps with 365 for JM press.
Yeah.
And
I've heard stories of that with, like, even JM Blakely and those guys, like into the 300s for JMs.
Yeah.
That's fucked up.
Yep. Yeah, it is. Look at this way. You've seen you've heard about Lou doing, like, the repetitions for 3 minutes and 5 minutes, like, dumbbell presses, 100-pound dumbbells for 3 minutes, 75-pound dumbbells, for 5 minutes, or, like, it's like, it sounds like ridiculous. And then you execute it. Yeah. You get 30, 40 seconds in and you're like, oh my God, this is fatiguing. This is horrible.
Yeah. And that's a lot of times that's what we see with people who have been training hard as CrossFitters or athletes other places who show up and work in with our groups. And it, like, they're watching the training unfold, and it's kind of shocking to the system to sort of see, like, man, this is like everyone here is just doing this kind of work, 6 days a week. It's standard. Like, man, I saw a photo come up this spring of a games athlete who had a photo of herself with the number 3 band for good mornings. And it's like, oh, make those accessories count. I was like, number 3 band for good mornings, you better be doing a fucking 1,000 of those or more.
Yeah.
Cause like for good mornings, 100 to 150 reps, like our best people can use a number 7 band for that rep range. And it's really unpleasant, but a number 4 band should be very comfortable for 100 to 150
high-end
reps.
Finisher. That's a high-end finisher. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the thing is, if let's say you don't have access to see like what world-class lifters are like, you're in someone who got to go to Westside Barbell or go to a world-class facility, and the biggest focus should be this. It should be just as important as your favorite lift. Favorite lift is bench, squat, overhead press, deadlift, clean and jerk, snatch. I don't care what it is. Put that level of intensity in. And if you have the time involved in that level of intensity, those numbers will show up and you'll start to learn what real numbers on accessories are. Okay. And it has to mean a lot to you. You have to really throw down on these accessory movements to get it. And whatever you think strong is, trust me, there's someone out there doing 3 times as much on that. And there are some people that can do some amazing things. And, some people are structurally built different than others. So some people are just going to hit a number you're not going to be able to catch. Doesn't mean they're stronger than you. It just means that one specific one. But what's great is say Jesse and Chris and I are lifting together and we're doing a deadlift. Let's say we all have the same weight deadlift, right? And then we go to accessory movements. So one of the nice things, if you really don't know what you're doing in accessory movements, here's some things you can pay attention, something you can pay attention to. If, Jesse and Chris and I all do the same accessory movement afterwards, and Jesse and Chris hit the same number, we all were within 5 or 10 pounds in the first movement. We go to the next movement, and Jesse and Chris are within 5, 10 pounds of each other, and I'm 40 pounds less than they are. Now that means there's a glaring weakness there I need to address before it's an injury, and that is my lack of performance. Now let's say Jesse and Chris hit the same within 5, 10 pounds of each other. We all have the same deadlift, but I hit 50 pounds more. This accessory to me is dead now. Okay?
Yeah.
I could care less. This is not going to do a thing for me. Okay? I need to find the accessories they're crushing me on, because if I'm beating them by that much on this accessory, they're beating me by that much on something else. And that is what I need. Okay.
Yeah. I think that's also the value of training group.
Yeah.
So the value of a training group then is when you get past that stage, like one, you could push each other hard on the max, but pushing each other hard on the max is definitely going to be a piece that's a kind of a given. Like, if you're not there, then, what are we doing? But after that, on the accessory pieces, that's where it can really pay off. When, you all come out of that max piece and you go to the next piece or the next piece and you're like, man, I really struggle with these. These guys are really good at this. Not only is it a piece to consider of like, sure, it can be leverages or et cetera, that you're going to be weaker on this piece because of, bone segment lengths, et cetera. But the point of it is when you train together as a team, if you're 40 pounds behind, you are going to work to close that gap. And inside of there is like a really great piece for feeding that and building that movement stronger. And I think with those, the training group is such a big piece, because the other side too is I've switched my training times for myself and I'm now training with a different group. And, it's the other guy's really strong. Like I'm not close to, we're stripping 50 kilos off the bar on the squat for me to be able to play. But I know once we get through that I'm going to push his pace on every single rest period, on every accessory work, because he's going to hate it. And that's where I can push on him to be better. So he pushes me on that max, I'll push him on pace on accessory, and we're both going to be better for it.
And again, that number that I'm 40 pounds off, right? I'm going to do every variation of that movement I can think of, and I'm going to do every accessory movement that I can think of that raises that variation up. That's my attack. That gives me my game plan. And so, when you have training partners, you have a bigger group for data collection, right? And then we use that, and that sorts it out for us. Because then again, this is what we talk about, creating that whip. Jesse and Chris and I might all have a different whip, meaning for a deadlift, we have these key movements that if we know what the weight is in those movements, then we know what our deadlift is. So we need to raise those up. Now, how do we raise those up? Or what movements are we lacking? Those movements that we get that is an outlier for us, weakness-wise, those are the ones that are going to drive that movement, because that's where you're losing speed and momentum. And once you start to lose speed and momentum, that's where you're going to end up, running out of time and missing the lift. Okay. So, it's something you just need to pay attention to. And it's just a very easy way, if you're a new coach, to find those weaknesses. Have groups of people similar strength training together and see where they each fail out on the accessories at and who accelerates where. And then you can start to put together a game plan. Okay.
So accessory movements like reverse hyper, GH raise, that sort of stuff in general, what do you guys take for rest periods?
For us, for accessories, it's 1 minute rest periods on average. Yep.
But what if you're really tired?
This is the difference. Same thing with same thing with the execution too, right? We talked about, I think this is where, for whatever reason, it is a little bit of an anomaly, but all of a sudden, like, you go to accessory work and it's like, oh, it's just kind of a filler time for working out. Like, no, like, accessory work should suck just as much as the lifts do.
If 1 minute, if they're tired and we're doing 1 minute accessory movements, we go in for the kill. Like, you're going to show somebody like, hey, look, man, this is where you need to up the ante. If they think you're dying too, why would they up the ante? If you walk through it like it's nothing, they know the next room they have to improve. Again, the pace that you can handle is just as important as the weight that you can move and the quality of which you move that weight. So all of it tells us something, no matter what. Mm-hmm. Just like Jesse pointed out just a second ago, guy's stronger than him. Okay, so that's how he's going to push Jesse, because Jesse's not going to be happy and content with that. Well, that guy's not going to be happy once Jesse gets to accessories and starts turning up the pace. That's going to tick him off. I'm taking it he's probably bigger than you if he's that much stronger than you.
I mean, give or take 70 odd pounds.
There you go. So just like when the guy said pound for pound, I see petite. I know Jesse's not a weak guy. So if he tells me a guy's that much, 50 kilos ahead of a movement, there's probably a good sized guy. Because otherwise we're talking about, now you have in Squamish, you have a world-class power lifter who's inside, an area that people should be skiing and mountain biking and climbing and stuff. Right. So, anyway, I decided to know the guy's a big guy. You know what a scary, dangerous big guy is? A big guy in conditioner can move heavy weight. Okay.
Yeah.
Totally. We were talking the other day, I have a guy that's 800 pound plus bencher, and he's 320 pounds with abs, and he will get a full max effort bench session in an hour and 15 minutes. And that might not seem fast to you, but when you have to add all those plates on to work up to that kind of weight, okay, the same guy, like I said, you can watch him, work up to a high 900, he'll pull a high 900 pound deadlift, and he'll work up to a 900 pound deadlift, and he'll get that done. He'll sit there. I mean, I've watched him do it in 10 minutes. Go from 0 to 900, that kind of weight in a 10, 15 minute time period, and then hammer out accessories. And you're like, do you understand the kind of conditioning a 300 pound man can get to a massive load like that within a 10, 15 minute time period, depending on exactly what the weight is? Now, he'll go beyond 900 pounds if he gives more time, but you're talking about he can ramp up to these kind of movements in a very short time period, and he has the ability to do that. If we show up to a powerlifting meet and there's not many people in his flight and it's a small meet, he's not going to panic. A lot of heavyweight guys will panic because they need those rest periods. They need bigger flights to have the rest periods. And they might start adjusting what they're going to do. Like for some heavyweights, they're going to I'm going to skip my second attempt. I'm going to do an opener. I'm going to do a third attempt. I need the extra time in between. If he's in good enough shape, he can take that extra attempt. He can take those attempts in between. And this gives him a higher chance of success. One more attempt if he was to miss a weight, or it might let us hone in on the third attempt really well. If he was to jump straight to his third attempt, maybe he misses that weight, and having that second attempt in there is something that would be better for him number-wise. But ultimately, what Jesse said is correct. Having training partners, it does allow you to collect data. The data could be, do they lift more weight, in that accessory movement, or the data could be, can they handle the pace that we're doing? There is a lot of information to be said there. But, what you need to do is bring in variation. And if you're not used to accessory movement, that is a variation right off the bat. Once you get the different variations coming in, this allows you to collect more data. The more data you have, the faster you can make change. And your changes that you make will be based off of some good hard evidence, and it'll give you point you in the right direction.
And knowing that data does always need to be collected because it will change. Mm-hmm. One of the pieces with accessory movement is those things you find, you're like, man, this made a huge difference for us, that will come to an end, and where it's no longer as valuable, or is it's past that point of diminishing return. So being able to reassess, like athletes sometimes get hung up on, well, I've never had weak my hamstrings are really strong, or my quads are really strong. You're like, at one point, but maybe not forever. And as you build up those strengths, as you fortify weaknesses, you might be creating other weaknesses or new weaknesses, and that changes and needs to be addressed. So it's actually always assessment. Like when you're working as a coach, or you don't have to be a coach, you just have to be a good training partner to be keeping an eye on your friends and be like, man, that's a funny way that they started moving like that, or they're struggling with this now, or they're falling behind on this piece. And it's always that assessment, and then trying to make that correction, recognizing it. The sooner you recognize it, the faster you can begin the corrective process of that. And you look to sort of avoid, hitting a dead spot or a plateau, or the exposure to injury.
Jesse said something that we followed as like rule of thumb, something I learned from Lou a long time ago. And that's every time you create a strength, you create a weakness. Okay. And a good coach will know after the meet what that weakness was and fix it. A great coach will know before you get there and before that weakness is created, make adjustments, right? So let's say Jesse's hamstrings are 10% behind his spinal erectors for a squat, right? If I increase his hamstring, so it's 10%. If I increase his spinal erector strength 5% over this next training cycle, okay, but I increase his hamstring strength 20%, his spinal erector is now at a 5% deficit. They are the weak link. Now his numbers are going to go up, like his squat will go up, but the weak link is that. And the farther away from perfect balance you are, the higher chance of injury, okay? So every time we create a strength, we create a weakness. It also means that since CrossFit's a very complicated sport to train for, because there's so much variation, so many different things that can come your way, that you need as much of this data collection you can have. And one of the things you have to think about also, if you look at Solomon, who, was at one point pound for pound the strongest, Ollie lifter in history, that, at one point in his career, his coaches noticed like his numbers are starting to go down. So they asked for his log book. When he broke out his log book, the coaches looked through it, noticed just on accident, his volume had started to drop a little bit. They brought his volume back up, went back up in strength, was not a problem at all. Had he not had that book, they might have wasted some time trying some other things and thinking it was something else, right? So what can easily happen when you're programming for people or programming for yourself is that you increase volume or you attack an area. And when you attack that other area, one of the areas that you normally work, you accidentally let the volume start to slip. So even if it might not be the other way, where I made the first example I made with hamstrings and spinal erectors, both areas got stronger during the same cycle. But one got stronger at a rate that exceeded the other area and created a weakness. Now what I'm talking about is that we increased volume in other areas and paid a lot of attention to these, and on accident allowed our volume to go down in other areas because we're paying so much attention to this, and that created a problem as well. So logging everything will help you be able to go back and look at and really kind of decipher and break down a little bit faster what the potential issues were for your training.
It is so frustrating when an athlete doesn't log stuff. It's one of the key pieces that says, I don't care. When an athlete is just like, hey, I'm struggling with this. Oh, okay, let's look at your logbook and see. I love being able to open a logbook and look. Like, for us, we log like the week, like it looks like a month. So you can actually see the days of the week they train. So you can, in a flip of our page of our logbook, you can kind of have a quick look at a 12-week cycle and see where they're at. And any PR is highlighted. So you can also have a quick glance and be like, how often is the athlete PRing? How often are they, how many days a week are they training? Starts to paint a pretty clear picture. I love it when they'll write in like, ski day or riding, or so you can get an idea of their sport volume as well. Cause all that starts to paint a pretty big picture. And you can start to be able to give good advice or direction pretty quickly off of just a glance at a well, maintained logbook. And like we spoke about earlier, that ability to be like, hey, reference, April 13th, 2022 for this lift. And they can go back and be like, oh, April 13th, I used 100-pound dumbbells for this movement pattern. Yeah. Let's see if I can get like 105 this time. So it's upticking that those little pieces with very little ask. Like it is not an unreasonable piece to say, hey, as you're working through this workout, when you get a chance, be writing everything down as you go. So we've got that information recorded on that day as part of that week in that bigger picture, the training logbook. And our books are like 1 year of time. So as you finish a logbook, it slides on the shelf and you can show a year diary of your training. You know, my shelf's got, you know, a lot of those now. And it's pretty cool to go back and flip through some of the old ones sometimes to look at where you were at a couple years back or so on and so forth. Like I've never had an athlete come to me and say, you know what? I wish I'd written down a lot less over the last bunch of years. You know?
Yeah, right.
What do you think? Should we wrap it there and then kind of?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we'll wrap it up there. I'll just click this off and then we can keep talking.
Cool.
Conjugate Nation Podcast.